Suffocating silence fills the air as Alex stands frozen in his dimly lit bedroom. The faint, rhythmic tapping begins again, soft, deliberate, almost sentient. It comes from within the walls this time, not from outside. His breath catches sharply, each exhale visible in the frigid room, despite the warmth of summer beyond the windows. What is that? Alex presses trembling hands against the peeling wallpaper, feeling for an answer. Beneath his palms, vibrations, pulse faintly, a heartbeat, or something else entirely? The tapping grows louder, more insistent, reverberating through the house like skeletal fingers testing the boundaries of reality, a hollow, bone-chilling thud, and then it stops. Reminiscent of a cherished memory viewed through a vintage lens. Dust motes dance in the sunbeams that stream through the living room window, illuminating a scene of domestic tranquility. Alex sits cross-legged on the worn Persian rug, his laughter echoing through the otherwise quiet house. Before him, a sleek black cat with piercing green eyes, Luna, playfully bats at a dangling string, her movements graceful and full of life. "She's all I've got," Alex's voice narrates over the scene, tinged with a mix of affection and melancholy. "After everything I've been through, she's the one constant. My shadow, my protector, my friend." Luna's fur gleams in the sunlight. She pounces on the string, her lithe body coiling and uncoiling with playful energy. Alex reaches out, gently stroking her back, and Luna responds with a soft purr that vibrates through the room. "Remember when I first found you, Luna?" Alex says, his voice filled with warmth. "You were just a tiny little thing, shivering in the rain. I couldn't just leave you there." "I don't know what I would do without you, Luna," Alex says, his voice thick with emotion. "You're my family. You're my everything." Luna purrs softly, her body trembling against his. She lifts her head, nuzzling Alex's cheek, as if sensing his distress. "I promise I'll always protect you," Alex whispers, his voice barely audible. "I'll never let anything happen to you." The warmth of the flashback lingers for a moment longer, as if the memory itself is reluctant to let go. The golden light bathes Alex and Luna in a soft glow, their bond radiating a sense of safety and love. Luna's purring grows louder, filling the room like a soothing melody, and Alex's voice echoes faintly in the background. "I'll never let anything happen to you." But then, like a candle snuffed out by an unseen hand, the light begins to fade. The golden hues dissolve into muted grays, and the comforting warmth is replaced by a creeping chill. The sound of Luna's purring distorts, warping into a low, hollow hum that reverberates through the air. The edges of the memory blur, the once vivid details smearing into shadows, until the scene itself begins to unravel. The screen cuts sharply to the present. The golden light is gone, replaced by the cold, harsh reality of the morning. The room is bathed in a pale, sterile light that filters through the half-closed blinds, casting long, jagged shadows across the walls. The air feels heavier now, stagnant and oppressive, as if the house itself is holding its breath. Alex stirs in bed, his face half buried in the pillow. The warmth of the memory still clings to him, like the fading remnants of a dream, but it's quickly overtaken by a gnawing sense of emptiness. His hand instinctively reaches out to the other side of the bed, searching for the familiar weight of Luna curled up beside him, but his fingers meet only the cold, rumpled sheets. His eyes flutter open, and for a moment, he lies still, staring at the ceiling. The silence is deafening. Normally, the mornings are filled with the soft sounds of Luna's meows, her paws patting against the floor, the faint jingle of her collar as she stretches and yawns. But today, there's nothing, just the hollow stillness of an empty house. "Luna?" Alex calls out, his voice hoarse from sleep. It's a reflex, a habit born from years of routine, but the sound of his own voice feels foreign in the quiet. He sits up slowly, his movements sluggish, and glances around the room. The sunlight streaming through the blinds feels cold against his skin, a stark contrast to the warmth of the memory that had just played in his mind. "Luna?" He calls again, louder this time, his voice tinged with unease. The silence that follows is heavier now, pressing down on his chest like a weight. Alex swings his legs over the side of the bed, his bare feet meeting the cool floor, and stands. The house feels different this morning off, somehow. The air is too still, the shadows too long, the quiet too absolute. He makes his way to the kitchen, his footsteps echoing faintly against the hardwood floor. Normally, Luna would be there, waiting by her food bowl, her tail flicking impatiently as she meowed for breakfast. But the kitchen is empty. The food bowl is untouched, the water dish still full. Alex's stomach tightens, a faint ripple of anxiety spreading through him. "Luna?" he calls again, his voice breaking slightly. He checks the living room, the bathroom, the close TV corner of the house where Luna might be hiding. But with each empty room, the unease grows, twisting into something darker, something closer to dread. By the time Alex returns to the bedroom, his heart is pounding in his chest. He sits on the edge of the bed, his hands trembling slightly as he runs his fingers through his hair. The silence is unbearable now, a constant, oppressive presence that seems to fill every corner of the house. It's as if the walls themselves are watching, waiting. Alex's gaze falls on the windowsill, where Luna often sits, her green eyes fixed on the world outside. The sunlight streaming through the glass feels colder now, harsher, and the empty space where Luna should be feels like a gaping void. Alex's mind races, grasping for an explanation, but none of them makes sense. Luna never leaves the house. She's always here, always waiting, always watching. The memory of her purring, her soft fur, her warm presence feels like a cruel taunt now, a reminder of what's missing. Alex's chest tightens, his breath coming in shallow, uneven gasps. He presses his hands to his face, trying to steady himself, but the weight of the silence is suffocating. "Where are you, Luna?" he whispers, his voice barely audible. The question hangs in the air, unanswered, as the shadows on the walls seem to stretch and shift, creeping closer. The warmth of the flashback is gone, replaced by a cold, gnawing emptiness that seeps into Alex's bones. The house feels different now, alien, unfamiliar, as if it's no longer his home. And for the first time, Alex feels truly alone. The house is unnervingly still, the kind of stillness that feels unnatural, as though the air itself is holding its breath. Alex stands in the middle of the kitchen, his hands gripping the edge of the counter as he stares at the untouched food bowl on the floor. The water dish sits beside it, the surface perfectly still, reflecting the pale morning light that filters through the window. Normally, this would be the time when Luna would be circling his legs, her tail brushing against him as she meowed impatiently for breakfast. But today, there's nothing, just silence. "Luna?" Alex calls out again, his voice echoing faintly through the house. It's the third time he's called her name, and the lack of response is beginning to gnaw at him. He tries to shake off the unease, telling himself that she's probably just hiding somewhere, curled up in one of her favorite spots. But the thought doesn't bring the comfort it should. Something feels wrong. Alex moves through the house, his footsteps slow and deliberate, the floor creaking softly beneath him. He checks all of Luna's usual hiding places, under the bed, behind the couch, inside the closet. Each time, he crouches down, his heart pounding in his chest as he peers into the shadows, half expecting to see her green eyes staring back at him. But each time, he's met with nothing but emptiness. "Come on, Luna," Alex mutters under his breath, his voice tinged with frustration and worry. "Where are you?" He makes his way to the living room, his eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. The room feels colder than usual, the air heavy and still. Alex's gaze falls on the windowsill, where Luna often sits, her sleek black body silhouetted against the glass as she watches the world outside. But the windowsill is empty, the sunlight streaming through the glass, casting long, jagged shadows across the floor. Alex's stomach tightens as he approaches the window, his hands trembling slightly. He presses his forehead against the cool glass, his breath fogging up the surface as he peers outside. The street is quiet, the kind of quiet that feels unnatural, as though the world itself has paused. The trees sway gently in the breeze, their bare branches scratching against the sky like skeletal fingers. A single car sits parked at the curb, its windows fogged over. There's no sign of movement, no sign of life. "Luna?" Alex whispers, his voice barely audible. The sound feels small, insignificant, swallowed up by the oppressive silence that fills the house. He turns away from the window, his chest tightening as a wave of unease washes over him. The house feels different this morning off, somehow. The familiar creaks and groans of the old floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic outside, all the little noises that usually make the house feel alive, are gone. It's as though the house itself is holding its breath, waiting. Alex's mind races, grasping for an explanation. Maybe Luna slipped out when he wasn't looking. Maybe she's hiding somewhere he hasn't checked yet. Maybe she's just playing a game, trying to get his attention. But deep down, he knows that none of these explanations feel right. Luna never leaves the house. She's always here, always waiting, always watching. The thought sends a chill down Alex's spine, and he wraps his arms around himself, trying to shake off the growing sense of dread. He glances at the clock on the wall, the hands ticking steadily forward, oblivious to the unease that has settled over the house. It's been over an hour since he woke up, and there's still no sign of Luna. "Okay," Alex says aloud, his voice trembling slightly. "Okay, let's think. She has to be here somewhere. She has to be." He takes a deep breath, trying to steady himself, and begins searching the house again. This time, he's more thorough, checking every nook and cranny, every dark corner where Luna might be hiding. He moves furniture, opens cabinets, even crawls under the bed, his heart pounding in his chest as he calls her name over and over again. "Luna, come on girl, where are you?" But the house remains silent, the oppressive stillness pressing down on Alex like a weight. By the time he finishes searching, his hands are trembling, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. He sinks down onto the couch, his head in his hands, as a wave of helplessness washes over him. "This doesn't make sense," Alex mutters, his voice muffled. "This doesn't make any sense." He sits there for a long moment, his mind racing, trying to make sense of the situation. The memory of Luna's soft purring, her green eyes, her warm presence, feels like a cruel taunt now, a reminder of what's missing. Alex's chest tightens, his throat constricting as tears prick at the corners of his eyes. "Where are you, Luna?" he whispers, his voice breaking. "Please, please come back." The sound of his own voice feels hollow, swallowed up by the silence that fills the house. Alex wipes his eyes, taking a shaky breath, and forces himself to stand. He can't just sit here. He has to do something. He grabs his phone from the kitchen counter and steps out onto the porch, the cool morning air biting at his skin. The neighborhood is eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that feels unnatural, as though the world itself is holding its breath. Alex's eyes scan the yard, his heart sinking as he calls out for Luna. "Luna, here girl!" His voice carries through the stillness, but there's no response. Alex steps off the porch, his bare feet crunching against the gravel as he makes his way toward the fence. The wind rustles the leaves, the sound faint and distant, like a whisper carried on the breeze. And then he sees it, a tuft of black fur, caught on the edge of the fence. Alex's breath catches in his throat as he rushes over, his hands trembling as he plucks the fur from the wood. It's soft, familiar, and unmistakably Luna's. His stomach twists, a sickening mix of fear and hope churning inside him. "Luna," he whispers, his voice barely audible. He clutches the tuft of fur in his hand, his mind racing. It's a clue, a sign that Luna was here, but it's also a sign that something is wrong. Luna never goes outside. She's always been an indoor cat, content to watch the world from the safety of the windowsill. For her to be out here, something must have happened. Something bad. Alex's eyes dart around the yard, scanning the shadows, the trees, the empty street. The unease that has been gnawing at him all morning grows stronger, twisting into something darker, something closer to dread. "Where are you, Luna?" he whispers again, his voice trembling. Alex stood frozen in the yard, the tuft of black fur clutched tightly in his trembling hand. The world around him seemed to blur, the edges of his vision swimming as his mind raced. The fur was unmistakably Luna-soft, sleek, and familiar, but the sight of it here, tangled in the splintered wood of the fence, sent a chill down his spine. Luna never went outside. She hated the outdoors, the noise, the unpredictability. For her to be out here, something must have happened. Something Alex couldn't yet explain. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves of the trees that lined the yard. The sound was faint, almost like a whisper, and Alex's eyes darted toward the shadows that stretched across the grass. For a moment, he thought he saw movement, a flicker of something just beyond the edge of the fence. But when he blinked, it was gone, leaving only the swaying branches and the faint creak of the wooden boards. "Luna?" Alex called out, his voice cracking. The sound felt small, swallowed up by the vast, oppressive silence that seemed to hang over the neighborhood. He took a hesitant step forward, his bare feet crunching against the gravel, and peered over the fence into the neighbor's yard. It was empty, the grass overgrown and unkempt, the shadows long and jagged in the pale morning light. Alex's grip on the tuft of fur tightened as he turned back toward the house. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one more unsettling than the last. Had Luna somehow gotten out during the night? Had someone taken her? The thought made his stomach churn, a sickening mix of fear and anger bubbling up inside him. He needed answers. He needed to find her. Back inside the house, Alex paced the living room, his footsteps echoing against the hardwood floor. The tuft of fur sat on the coffee table, a stark reminder of Luna's absence. Alex's phone lay beside it, the screen dark and unresponsive. He had already tried calling a few friends, hoping for some reassurance, but no one had answered. The silence on the other end of the line had only deepened his sense of isolation. "Think, Alex," he muttered to himself, running a hand through his hair. Where could she have gone? What could have happened? His eyes scanned the room, searching for anything he might have missed. The house felt different, now alien, unfamiliar. The shadows seemed to stretch farther than they should, the corners darker and more oppressive. Alex's gaze fell on the windowsill, where Luna often sat, her green eyes fixed on the world outside. The sunlight streaming through the glass felt colder now, harsher, and the empty space where Luna should be felt like a gaping void. And then he saw it, a faint smudge on the glass, just above the windowsill. Alex's heart skipped a beat as he stepped closer, his breath fogging up the surface as he leaned in to get a better look. The smudge was small, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable paw print. Luna's paw print. Alex's chest tightened as he reached out, his fingers brushing against the glass. The print was faint, as though it had been left in a moment of panic, a desperate attempt to claw at the window. Alex's mind raced, trying to piece together what could have happened. Had Luna been trying to get out, or had she been trying to get back in? The thought sent a shiver down his spine, and he pulled his hand back, his fingers trembling. The paw print felt like a clue, a breadcrumb left behind in the wake of something he couldn't yet understand. But it also felt like a warning, a silent plea for help that had gone unanswered. Alex turned away from the window, his stomach churning as he tried to steady his breathing. He needed to do something. He couldn't just sit here, waiting for answers that might never come. He grabbed his phone from the coffee table and opened the camera app, snapping a picture of the paw print before heading back outside. The yard was just as he had left it, quiet, still, and unnervingly empty. Alex's eyes scanned the ground, searching for any other signs of Luna's presence. The tuft of fur had been the first clue, but there had to be more. There had to be something that would lead him to her. And then he saw it. A faint trail of paw prints, barely visible in the dirt near the edge of the fence. Alex's heart leapt as he crouched down, his fingers tracing the outline of the prints. They were small, delicate, and unmistakably Luna's. The trail led away from the house, weaving through the grass and disappearing into the shadows of the trees that lined the yard. Alex's stomach twisted as he followed the trail, his heart pounding in his chest. The air felt colder now, the wind biting at his skin as he stepped into the shade of the trees. The shadows seemed to stretch and shift around him, the faint rustle of leaves sounding almost like whispers. Alex's breath came in short, shallow gasps as he scanned the ground, his eyes darting from one print to the next. The trail led him to the edge of the yard, where the fence gave way to a narrow alley that ran between the houses. The alley was overgrown with weeds, the ground littered with broken branches and discarded trash. Alex hesitated for a moment, his stomach churning as he peered into the shadows. The alley felt wrong, as though it didn't belong, as though it was a place that had been forgotten by the world. But the paw prints were there, faint but visible, leading deeper into the darkness. "Luna," Alex whispered, his voice trembling. He took a hesitant step forward, his feet crunching against the gravel, and followed the trail into the alley. The air grew colder with each step, the shadows pressing in around him like a living thing. Alex's heart pounded in his chest, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps as he scanned the ground, his eyes darting from one print to the next. The trail led him to a small clearing at the end of the alley, where the ground was littered with broken glass and rusted metal. Alex's stomach twisted as he stepped into the clearing, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of Luna. The air was thick and heavy, the silence oppressive, as though the world itself was holding its breath. And then he saw it. A small wooden figurine sitting in the center of the clearing. Alex's breath caught in his throat as he stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the figurine. It was small and crude, carved from a dark, weathered wood that seemed to absorb the light. The figure was humanoid in shape, but its proportions were all wrong. Its arms too long, its head too large, its body twisted and contorted in a way that made Alex's skin crawl. But it wasn't the figurine itself that sent a chill down Alex's spine. It was what was tied around its neck. Luna's collar. The sight of it made Alex's stomach churn, a sickening mix of fear and anger bubbling up inside him. He reached out, his fingers trembling, and picked up the figurine. The wood was cold and rough against his skin, and the collar dangled from its neck like a cruel mockery of the bond he shared with Luna. "Luna," Alex whispered, his voice breaking. Tears pricked at the corners of his eyes as he clutched the figurine to his chest, his mind racing. What was this? Who had left it here? And what had they done to Luna? The questions swirled in Alex's mind, each one more unsettling than the last. He turned the figurine over in his hands, his fingers tracing the rough edges of the wood. There were strange markings carved into its surface as symbols that Alex didn't recognize, but that filled him with a deep, primal sense of unease. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves of the trees that surrounded the clearing. The sound was faint, almost like a whisper, and Alex's eyes darted toward the shadows. For a moment, he thought he saw a momentous flicker of something just beyond the edge of the clearing, but when he blinked, it was gone, leaving only the swaying branches and the faint creak of the wooden boards. Alex's grip on the figurine tightened as he turned back toward the house, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew one thing for certain: something was very, very wrong. Clutching the crude wooden figurine and Luna's collar, Alex stumbled back toward the house, his mind reeling. The weight of the object in his hand felt heavy, not just physically, but emotionally, as if it carried the weight of Luna's absence and the growing dread that was consuming him. The morning, which had begun with a sense of quiet unease, had spiraled into a nightmare. Back inside, Alex placed the figurine on the kitchen table, the smooth surface a stark contrast to the rough, unsettling object. The figurine seemed to radiate a coldness, a palpable sense of wrongness that made the hairs on the back of Alex's neck stand on end. He stared at it, his mind racing, trying to make sense of what it could mean. The strange symbols carved into its surface seemed to writhe before his eyes, as if they were trying to communicate something dark and sinister. "What is this?" Alex whispered, his voice trembling. "What have I gotten myself into?" He knew he couldn't stay here, alone with his fear and the unsettling figurine. He needed answers, and the only place he could think to look was among his neighbors. Maybe someone had seen something. Maybe someone knew something about what was happening. It was a long shot, but it was better than doing nothing. Taking a deep breath, Alex stepped out of the house and onto the porch. The neighborhood seemed different now, the familiar streets and houses taking on a sinister edge. The trees swayed in the breeze, their branches casting long, skeletal shadows across the lawns. The air felt heavy, charged with an unspoken tension that made Alex's skin crawl. He started with Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman who lived next door. Mrs. Henderson was a fixture in the neighborhood, always tending to her garden, always ready with a smile and a kind word. But as Alex approached her house, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The curtains were drawn, the garden overgrown and neglected, and the house itself seemed to sag under the weight of its own secrets. Alex hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering over the doorbell. He didn't want to intrude, but he needed to know if Mrs. Henderson had seen anything. Taking a deep breath, he pressed the bell and waited. The silence stretched on, broken only by the distant sound of birds chirping in the trees. Alex was about to give up when he heard the sound of shuffling feet inside the house. The door creaks open, revealing Miss Henderson standing in the shadows. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and unfocused, as if she had been startled awake. "Alex, dear," she said, her voice raspy and weak. "What can I do for you?" "Mrs. Henderson," Alex said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I was wondering if you had seen Luna this morning. She's missing, and I'm worried about her." Mrs. Henderson's eyes flickered, as if she were trying to recall something. She shook her head slowly, her gaze drifting off into the distance. "No, dear, I haven't seen her. I've been inside all morning, not feeling quite myself, you see." Alex's heart sank. He had hoped that Mrs. Henderson might have some information, but it seemed like he was out of luck. "I understand," Alex said, trying to hide his disappointment. "Well, thank you anyway, Mrs. Henderson. I hope you feel better soon." "You be careful now, dear," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice barely audible. "There are things in this neighborhood that aren't always what they seem." Alex frowned, his eyes narrowing. "What do you mean, Mrs. Henderson?" But Mrs. Henderson just shook her head again, her gaze unfocused. "Never you mind, dear. Just be careful and keep your doors locked." With that, she closed the door, leaving Alex standing on the porch, his mind racing. What had Mrs. Henderson meant by that? What things weren't what they seemed? And why had she seemed so afraid? Alex moved on to the next house, the home of Mr. Abernathy, a retired history teacher who had lived in the neighborhood for decades. Mr. Abernathy was a wealth of knowledge about the area, and Alex had always enjoyed talking to him about the history of the town. Maybe he would know something about what was happening. As Alex approached Mr. Abernathy's house, he noticed that the front door was slightly ajar. He hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to knock or just walk in. But the door seemed to beckon him, as if it were inviting him to step inside and uncover the secrets that lay hidden within. Taking a deep breath, Alex pushed the door open and stepped into the house. The air inside was thick with the smell of dust and old books, the silence broken only by the faint ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway. Alex called out Mr. Abernathy's name, but there was no response. He moved through the house, his footsteps echoing against the hardwood floor. The living room was filled with books, stacks of them piled high on the shelves, the tables, even the floor. Alex's eyes scanned the titles, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of the chaos. And then he saw it. A small leather-bound book lying open on the coffee table. Alex stepped closer, his heart pounding in his chest as he read the words on the page. "The history of this town is stained with blood," the book read. "There are things that have happened here that are best left forgotten, but the past has a way of resurfacing, of reminding us that we can never truly escape our sins." Alex's breath caught in his throat as he read on, his eyes scanning the page for any mention of Luna, any clue that might explain what was happening. The book was filled with stories of disappearances, strange occurrences, and unexplained deaths. It spoke of a dark presence that had haunted the town for centuries, a malevolent force that fed on fear and despair. As Alex read, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The shadows in the room seemed to deepen, the air growing colder and heavier. He glanced around, his heart pounding in his chest, but there was no one there. And then he heard it, a faint whisper coming from the hallway. Alex froze, his body tensing as he strained to hear what the whisper was saying. It was too faint to make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Low, guttural murmur that sent a shiver down Alex's spine. He took a hesitant step toward the hallway, his hand reaching out to grasp the edge of the bookshelf. The whisper grew louder, more insistent, as he moved closer. Alex's heart pounded in his chest, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. And then he saw him, Mr. Abernathy, standing in the shadows of the hallway. His face was pale, his eyes wide and unfocused, as if he were in a trance. He was muttering something under his breath, his voice barely audible. "Mr. Abernathy?" Alex said, his voice trembling. "Are you okay?" Mr. Abernathy didn't respond. He just stood there, his eyes fixed on something that Alex couldn't see, his lips moving silently as he continued to mutter. Alex took another step closer, his hand reaching out to touch Mr. Abernathy's arm. But as he did, Mr. Abernathy's head snapped up, his eyes locking onto Alex's. His gaze was cold, empty, and filled with a malevolence that made Alex's blood run cold. "You shouldn't be here," Mr. Abernathy said, his voice raspy and strained. "You don't know what you've stumbled into." Alex's heart pounded in his chest as he took a step back, his eyes wide with fear. "What do you mean, Mr. Abernathy? What's going on?" But Mr. Abernathy just shook his head, his gaze unfocused. "Leave this place," he said, his voice barely audible, "before it's too late." With that, he turned and shuffled away, disappearing into the shadows of the house. Alex stood there for a long moment, his mind reeling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. What had Mr. Abernathy meant? What had he stumbled into? And why did everyone seem so afraid? The weight of the day's events pressed heavily on Alex as he returned home. Alex placed the figurine on the kitchen table, its jagged edges catching the dim light. The air in the house felt heavier now, charged with an unspoken tension that made his skin crawl. The basement door loomed at the edge of the kitchen, slightly ajar, as if inviting him to step inside. Alex's stomach churned, a deep, primal fear taking root in his chest. But he couldn't ignore the pull to sense that whatever answers he sought were waiting for him down there. The strange encounters with his neighbors had only deepened his unease. Mrs. Henderson's cryptic warnings, Mr. Abernathy's chilling words, none of it made sense. But it all pointed to one thing. Something was very wrong in this neighborhood. and somehow, Luna was at the center of it. Alex's gaze drifted toward the basement door. It loomed at the edge of the kitchen, slightly ajar, as if inviting him to step inside. He had always hated the basement. It was cold, damp, and filled with the kind of darkness that seemed to swallow the light. But now, standing there in the oppressive silence of the house, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that the answers he sought might be waiting for him down there. Alex hesitated at the top of the basement stairs, the door creaking open before him like a gaping maw. The air that wafted up was damp and cold, carrying with it the faint, metallic tang of mildew and something far less natural. The air was thick with the stench of mildew and decay, a cloying scent that clung to Alex's skin and filled his lungs. His flashlight trembled in his hand, the beam cutting a narrow path into the suffocating darkness below. He thought of Sarah. She had been here, just days ago, sitting on the couch beside him, her face pale and her hands trembling as the whispers filled the room. She had heard them too, seen the shadows writhe and stretch in ways that defied logic. For a moment, he had felt vindicated, his terror validated by her wide-eyed disbelief. But when the night had ended, and the whispers had receded with the dawn, Sarah had left. "You can't stay here, Alex," she had said, her voice trembling as she stood in the doorway, her car idling in the driveway. "This house? It's not safe. You need to leave. Please, come with me." But he hadn't gone. He couldn't. The house had its claws in him, its whispers burrowing into his mind, its shadows pressing against his chest like a weight he couldn't escape. He had watched Sarah drive away, her taillights disappearing into the early morning mist, and he had turned back to the house, the oppressive silence greeting him like an old enemy. Now, standing at the threshold of the basement, Alex felt the weight of that decision pressing down on him. He had stayed because he needed answers, because he couldn't let the house win. But as he stared into the darkness below, the memory of Sarah's words echoed in his mind, a faint, desperate plea. "Please, Alex, don't stay here." He took a deep breath, his grip tightening on the flashlight, and stepped onto the first stair. The wood groaned beneath his weight, the sound amplified in the oppressive silence. The air grew colder with each step, the darkness pressing in around him like a living thing. The whispers began again, faint at first, then growing louder, more insistent, as if the house itself was mocking him. "Alex?" The voice was a low, guttural rasp, vibrating through the walls and the floor, resonating deep within his chest. It was the same voice he had heard that night with Sarah, the same voice that had called his name from the walls, mimicking him with a chilling precision. But now, it was closer, more commanding, as if it no longer needed to hide behind the pretense of subtlety. He reached the bottom of the stairs, his breath coming in shallow gasps, and swept the flashlight across the room. The basement was just as he remembered, it cluttered with old furniture and forgotten boxes, the concrete walls damp and cracked. But the air was different now, heavier, charged with a malevolent energy that made his skin crawl. Alex's gaze fell on the far corner of the room, where the makeshift altar stood, draped in tattered fabric and surrounded by the melted remains of candles. The sight of it sent a shiver down his spine, the memory of the figurine flashing in his mind. He had found it here, in this very spot, its jagged edges biting into his palm as the whispers roared around him. He had thought destroying it would end the nightmare, but the shadows had only grown stronger, their demands more insistent. "You took what was ours," the voice had said that night, its words echoing in his mind like a curse. "Return it, and perhaps we can finally be free." But he hadn't returned it. He had destroyed it, shattered it into splinters in a desperate attempt to break the house's hold on him. And now, as he stood before the altar, the weight of that decision pressed down on him like a physical force. The whispers grew louder, the air grew heavier, pressing against Alex's chest like a physical weight, and the whispers seemed to crawl into his ears, burrowing deep into his mind, swirling around him in a chaotic symphony of sound. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to writhe and stretch, their movements slow and deliberate, as if they were alive. Alex's flashlight flickered, the beam sputtering as the oppressive darkness closed in around him. "Alex?" The voice boomed again, louder now, and the floor beneath his feet vibrated with a low, ominous hum. "Let us in." Taking a deep breath, Alex grabbed a flashlight from the drawer and approached the door. The air grew colder as he stepped closer, the faint smell of mildew wafting up from the depths below. His hand trembled as he gripped the doorknob, pushing the door open with a creak that echoed through the house. The stairs stretched down into the darkness, each step disappearing into the shadows. Alex hesitated for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest before forcing himself to descend. The wooden steps groaned under his weight, the sound unnervingly loud in the stillness. The beam of the flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the cluttered space below. As Alex descended the stairs, he thought he heard a faint sound of meow, soft and distant, barely audible over the creaking of the steps. He froze, his heart pounding, but the sound didn't come again. Shaking his head, he told himself it was just his imagination, a cruel trick of the mind. The basement was just as he remembered, it cramped and cluttered, filled with old furniture, boxes of forgotten belongings, and the faint hum of the water heater. But as Alex moved deeper into the room, the air grew colder, the shadows darker, and the oppressive feeling of being watched grew stronger. "Luna?" Alex called out, his voice trembling. The sound echoed off the concrete walls, but there was no response. He swept the flashlight across the room, his eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. And then he saw it. In the far corner of the basement, hidden behind a stack of old boxes, was something that didn't belong. Alex's breath caught in his throat as he stepped closer, the beam of the flashlight illuminating a makeshift altar. It was crude and unsettling, made of splintered wood and draped in tattered fabric. Candles, long since burned out, surrounded the altar, their wax melted into grotesque shapes that clung to the floor. But it was what sat on the altar that made Alex's stomach churn. A small, twisted figure lay sprawled across the surface, its body contorted in a way that defied logic. At first, Alex thought it was another figurine, like the one he had found in the alley. But as he stepped closer, the truth became horrifyingly clear. It wasn't a figurine. It was the body of a cat. "Luna," Alex whispered, his voice breaking. His knees buckled, and he dropped to the floor, the flashlight clattering beside him. His breath came in shallow gasps as he stared at the lifeless form on the altar, his mind refusing to accept what he was seeing. The silence pressed down on him, heavy and suffocating, until it was broken by a sound that made his blood run cold. A faint, insistent scratching from the far corner of the basement. Tears blurred his vision as he stared at the lifeless form on the altar, his mind refusing to accept what he was seeing. The sleek black fur, the delicate paws, the familiar shape, it was Luna. Or at least, it had been. Alex's hands trembled as he reached out, his fingers brushing against the cold, lifeless fur. But as he did, he noticed something strange. The body wasn't whole. It was hollow, as if something had been taken from it, leaving behind only an empty shell. And carved into the fur, etched with a precision that made Alex's skin crawl, were the same strange symbols he had seen on the wooden figurine. A piece of paper lay beside the altar, its edges singed as if it had been pulled from a fire. Alex's hands shook as he picked it up, his eyes scanning the words scrawled across the surface in jagged, uneven handwriting. "The offering has been made. The pact is sealed. The shadows will protect us." Alex's stomach twisted, a sickening mix of fear and anger bubbling up inside him. He crumpled the paper in his fist, his mind racing. What did this mean? Who had done this? And why? The sound of scratching broke through Alex's thoughts, sharp and insistent, coming from the far corner of the basement. He froze, his breath catching in his throat as he turned toward the sound. The flashlight flickered, the beam of light sputtering as the scratching grew louder, more frantic. It was coming from the shadows, from a place the light couldn't reach. "Who's there?" Alex demanded, his voice trembling. The scratching stopped, replaced by a low, guttural whisper that seemed to echo from all around him. The words were unintelligible, but the tone was unmistakable mocking, taunting, filled with malice. The flashlight flickered again, the light dimming until the room was plunged into near darkness. Alex's heart pounded in his chest as he scrambled to his feet, his hands fumbling with the flashlight. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling the room with a cacophony of sound that made Alex's head spin. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the noise stopped. The flashlight sputtered back to life, the beam of light cutting through the darkness. Alex's eyes darted around the room, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The altar was empty. The body of the cat, the paper, the symbols, they were all gone, as if they had never been there. The basement door slammed shut with a deafening bang, the sound reverberating through the house. Alex spun around, his heart racing as he sprinted toward the stairs. He grabbed the doorknob, twisting it frantically, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers returned, louder now, filling the room with a deafening roar. "Let me out," Alex shouted, his voice breaking. He pounded on the door, his fists slamming against the wood as the whispers grew louder, more chaotic. The flashlight flickered again, the beam of light dimming until the room was plunged into total darkness. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the noise stopped. The door creaked open, the light from the kitchen spilling into the basement. Alex stumbled out, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he collapsed onto the floor. His hands were trembling, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. He looked up, his eyes darting toward the window. Outside, standing in the yard, was Mr. Grayson. His neighbor's face was obscured by the shadows, but Alex could feel his gaze, cold and unrelenting, fixed on him. Mr. Grayson's lips curled into a faint, unsettling smile before he turned and disappeared into the darkness. Alex sat there for a long moment, his chest heaving as he tried to steady his breathing. The weight of the day's events pressed heavily on him, the fear and confusion threatening to overwhelm him. And then, faint and distant, he heard it. A meow. The faint meow, barely audible, sent a jolt of adrenaline through Alex. He scrambled to his feet, his eyes scanning the yard, searching for any sign of Luna. The sound had been distant, ethereal, as if it had come from another place, another time. But it had been enough to reignite the spark of hope that had been flickering within him. He stumbled out of the house, his bare feet crunching against the gravel as he made his way toward the fence. The air was cold, the shadows long and jagged in the pale moonlight. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, the silence broken only by the distant hoot of an owl. "Luna?" Alex called out, his voice trembling. "Luna, are you there?" There was no response. The meow had been a fleeting whisper, a cruel tease that had vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Alex's heart sank, the weight of despair pressing down on him once again. He turned back toward the house, his mind racing. The events in the basement had been terrifying, surreal, as if he had stepped into a nightmare. The altar, the cat's body, the note, the whisper sit, all pointed to something dark, something sinister that was happening in this neighborhood. And Mr. Grayson, with his knowing smile and his unsettling presence, seemed to be at the center of it all. Alex's gaze drifted toward Mr. Grayson's house. It loomed at the edge of the yard, dark and imposing, its windows like vacant eyes staring out into the night. He had always felt uneasy around Mr. Grayson, a sense of unease that had only grown stronger in recent days. Now, standing there in the moonlight, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that his neighbor held the key to everything that was happening. Taking a deep breath, Alex crossed the yard and approached the fence that separated his property from Mr. Grayson's noten. The wood was cold and rough against his skin as he peered over the top, his eyes scanning the yard. It was overgrown and unkempt, the grass long and tangled, the shadows deep and impenetrable. And then he saw it. A faint light flickered in the basement window of Mr. Grayson's house. Alex's heart skipped a beat. He had never seen a light on in Mr. Grayson's basement before. The thought of what might be happening down there sent a shiver down his spine. He had to know. He had to find out what Mr. Grayson was hiding. Without hesitation, Alex climbed over the fence and dropped into Mr. Grayson's yard. The ground was uneven, the grass wet and slippery beneath his feet. He moved cautiously toward the house, his senses on high alert, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. The basement window was small and grimy, barely large enough to see through. Alex crouched down, his heart pounding in his chest, and peered inside. The light was dim, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. And in the center of the basement, surrounded by candles and strange symbols, was Mr. Grayson. He was chanting something under his breath, his voice low and guttural, his eyes closed in concentration. He was dressed in a long, black robe, his hands raised in the air as if he were conducting some kind of ritual. And lying on the floor before him, bound and gagged, was Luna. Alex's blood ran cold. He had been right. Mr. Grayson was behind everything. He had taken Luna. He had performed some kind of dark ritual, and he was about to do something unspeakable to her. Without thinking, Alex grabbed a rock from the ground and hurled it at the basement window. The glass shattered with a deafening crash, the sound echoing through the night. Mr. Grayson's eyes snapped open, his gaze locking onto Alex's bananas, his face twisted into a mask of rage, his lips curling into a snarl. Alex's breath caught in his throat as he locked eyes with Mr. Grayson. Even from a distance, he could feel the weight of his neighbor's gaze, cold and unrelenting, like a predator sizing up its prey. "You shouldn't have done that," he he hissed, his voice filled with venom. "Now you'll pay the price." Mr. Grayson lunged toward Alex, his hands outstretched, his eyes burning with a malevolent fire. Alex stumbled back, his heart pounding in his chest, his mind racing. He had to get out of there. He had to save Luna. He turned and ran, his feet pounding against the ground as he sprinted toward the fence. Mr. Grayson was right behind him, his footsteps heavy and relentless. Alex could feel his breath on his neck, his hands reaching out to grab him. He reached the fence and scrambled over it, his body slamming against the wood as he dropped back into his own yard. He didn't stop running. He ran toward the house, toward the safety of the light, toward the hope that he could still save Luna. He burst through the front door, his chest heaving, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He slammed the door shut and locked it, his hands trembling as he leaned against the wood, his eyes darting toward the windows. Mr. Grayson was standing in the yard, his face pressed against the glass, his eyes burning with a malevolent fire. He raised his hand, his fingers curling into a claw, and scratched at the window, the sound sending a shiver down Alex's spine. "You can't hide from me," he hissed, his voice muffled by the glass. "I'll find you, and when I do, you'll regret the day you ever crossed me." Alex stood there, frozen in fear, his back pressed against the cold wooden door. His breath came in shallow, uneven gasps, each one louder than the oppressive silence that filled the house. The scratching at the window was relentless, a slow, deliberate sound that seemed to echo inside his skull. It wasn't frantic or hurried, it was calculated, like the ticking of a clock counting down to something inevitable. Each scrape of Mr. Grayson's nails against the glass sent a shiver down Alex's spine, the sound grating and unnatural, as if it were meant to unnerve him, to break him. Through the thin veil of the curtains, Alex could see Mr. Grayson's face, pale and distorted by the moonlight. His eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the dim light like those of a predator in the dark. They burned with a malevolent intensity, unblinking, locked onto Alex as if he were prey. His lips were pulled back into a twisted grin, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too perfect, as though they had been filed down to points. The smile wasn't human, it was something else entirely, something that didn't belong in this world. Alex's legs felt like lead, his body refusing to move as his mind screamed at him to run, to hide, to do anything but stand there. His heart pounded in his chest, the sound deafening in his ears, drowning out everything but the scratching. He could feel the weight of Mr. Grayson's gaze, heavy and suffocating, as if it were pressing down on him, rooting him to the spot. It wasn't just fear that held him in place, it was something deeper, something primal, as though his body instinctively knew that any sudden movement would only provoke the thing outside. The scratching stopped. The sudden silence was worse than the sound. It was thick and oppressive, wrapping around Alex like a shroud. He strained to hear, his ears searching for any sign of movement, but the world outside had gone deathly still. Even the wind had stopped, the trees no longer swaying, their branches frozen in place like skeletal hands reaching toward the sky. The air felt heavy, charged with an unnatural energy that made Alex's skin crawl. And then, a voice. "You can't hide from me, Alex," Mr. Grayson said, his voice low and guttural, barely more than a whisper. But it wasn't muffled by the glass, it was as if the words were inside the house, inside Alex's head, slithering through his thoughts like a serpent. "I see you. I see everything." Alex's stomach churned, bile rising in his throat as the words echoed in his mind. There was something wrong with the way Mr. Grayson spoke, the way his voice seemed to twist and distort, as though it didn't belong to him. It was layered, overlapping, as if more than one voice was speaking at once, some human, some not. The sound was unnatural, otherworldly, and it made Alex's chest tighten with a suffocating sense of dread. The scratching resumed, faster now, more frantic, as if Mr. Grayson was trying to claw his way inside. The glass rattled in its frame, the sound sharp and jarring, and Alex's breath hitched as he realized the window wouldn't hold for long. He could see the faint outline of Mr. Grayson's hand, his fingers long and thin, the nails blackened and jagged, leaving deep gouges in the glass. The sight of it made Alex's skin crawl, his mind racing with thoughts of what would happen if those hands got hold of him. "You can't stop me," Mr. Grayson hissed, his voice dripping with malice. "You don't even know what you're dealing with. You're nothing, Alex. Nothing." Alex's knees buckled, and he slid down the door, his hands trembling as he clutched at his chest. The weight of Mr. Grayson's words was crushing, each one sinking into him like a blade. He felt small, powerless, like a child lost in the dark. His mind raced with memories of Luna, her soft purring, her green eyes, her warm presence. The thought of her out there, alone and vulnerable, filled him with a deep, aching sorrow. He couldn't lose her. He couldn't let this monster take her away from him. Tears pricked at the corners of Alex's eyes as he clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. He couldn't let fear paralyze him. He couldn't let Mr. Grayson win. He had to protect Luna. He had to protect himself. He had to fight back. The scratching stopped again, and Alex's breath caught in his throat. The silence was deafening, the tension unbearable. He could feel the weight of Mr. Grayson's presence, the oppressive energy seeping through the walls, the windows, the very air around him. And then, slowly, deliberately, Mr. Grayson spoke again. "I'm coming in." The words sent a jolt of terror through Alex, his body trembling as he forced himself to his feet. He stumbled toward the hallway, his mind racing, searching for something, anything he could use to defend himself. His eyes landed on the baseball bat leaning against the wall, and he grabbed it, the weight of it grounding him, giving him a sliver of courage. The sound of glass shattering echoed through the house, sharp and violent, and Alex spun around, his heart pounding in his chest. The window in the living room was broken, shards of glass glittering on the floor like jagged teeth. The curtains billowed in the cold night air, and Alex could see the faint outline of Mr. Grayson stepping through the frame, his movements slow and deliberate, like a predator savoring the hunt. Alex gripped the bat tighter, his knuckles white, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, his fear giving way to a desperate determination. He wouldn't let Mr. Grayson win. He wouldn't let him take Luna. He wouldn't let him take anything else. "Stay back!" Alex shouted, his voice trembling but firm. "I'm warning you!" Mr. Grayson tilted his head, his twisted smile widening. "Oh, Alex," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "You don't understand. This isn't a fight you can win." He took a step closer, his eyes glowing faintly in the darkness, his presence filling the room with an oppressive, suffocating energy. Alex's grip on the bat tightened, his muscles tensing as he prepared to swing. He could feel the weight of Mr. Grayson's gaze, the malice radiating from him like a physical force. But Alex didn't back down. He couldn't. He wouldn't. "I don't care what you are," Alex said, his voice steady now, his fear replaced by a fierce determination. "You're not taking her. You're not taking anything from me." And with that, he swung the bat. The scratching at the window intensified, a relentless, maddening sound that chipped away at Alex's resolve. Mr. Grayson's face, contorted with rage and malice, was a terrifying sight. Alex knew he couldn't stay here, cowering in fear. He had to act. He had to save Luna. He raced through the house, his mind racing, searching for anything he could use as a weapon. A baseball bat leaned against the wall in the hallway. He grabbed it, the weight of it familiar and comforting in his trembling hands. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves, and crept back toward the front door. Mr. Grayson was still there, his face pressed against the glass, his eyes burning with a malevolent fire. He stopped scratching, his lips curling into a sinister smile. "You can't hide from me, Alex," he said, his voice muffled by the glass. "You don't understand, do you? The shadows, they demand balance. They demand offerings. I've kept them at bay for years, but you've disrupted everything." His voice dropped to a whisper, his expression twisting into something almost pitiful. "You should have stayed out of it. Now they'll come for you too." Alex gripped the baseball bat tighter, his knuckles turning white. He knew that Mr. Grayson was right. He couldn't hide. He had to face him. He threw open the door and stepped out onto the porch, the baseball bat raised high above his head. Mr. Grayson recoiled, his eyes widening in surprise. "Stay away from me," Alex shouted, his voice trembling but firm. "And stay away from Luna." Mr. Grayson chuckled, a low, guttural sound that sent a shiver down Alex's spine. "You think you can stop me? You have no idea what you're dealing with." He lunged at Alex, his hands outstretched, his eyes burning with a malevolent fire. Alex swung the baseball bat with all his might, connecting with Mr. Grayson's shoulder. "Mr. Grayson cried out in pain, stumbling backward. Alex didn't hesitate. He swung the bat again, hitting Mr. Grayson in the leg. Mr. Grayson fell to the ground, writhing in agony. "Stay down!" Alex shouted, his voice filled with adrenaline. "I'm calling the police." He pulled out his phone and dialed 911, his hands shaking so badly that he could barely press the numbers. He reported the incident, his voice trembling as he described what had happened. While he was on the phone, Mr. Grayson struggled to his feet, his eyes filled with rage. He lunged at Alex again, his hands reaching out to grab him. Alex dodged the attack and swung the baseball bat, hitting Mr. Grayson in the head. Mr. Grayson collapsed to the ground, unconscious. Alex stood there for a long moment, his chest heaving, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had done it. He had stopped Mr. Grayson, but he knew that the fight wasn't over. He still had to save Luna. He ran toward Mr. Grayson's house, his heart pounding in his chest. He kicked in the basement door, his eyes scanning the room. The candles were still burning, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. And lying on the floor, bound and gagged, was Luna. Alex rushed to her side, his hands trembling as he untied the ropes that bound her. Luna meowed weakly, her eyes filled with fear. "It's okay, Luna," Alex said, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm here. You're safe now." He scooped her up in his arms, his heart swelling with relief. He carried her out of the basement, out of Mr. Grayson's house, and back to his own home. He laid her down on the couch, his hands gently stroking her fur. Luna purred softly, nuzzling against his hand. The police arrived a few minutes later, sirens blaring, lights flashing. They took Mr. Grayson into custody, his face bruised and battered, his eyes filled with hatred. They questioned Alex, taking a statement, gathering evidence. As the police led Mr. Grayson away, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. He had stopped Mr. Grayson, but he knew that the darkness that had taken root in this neighborhood was still there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its chance to strike again. Alex sat on the edge of the couch, his body trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. The house was eerily quiet now, the chaos of the night reduced to a suffocating stillness. The faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen was the only sound, but even that felt distant, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Luna lay curled up on the couch beside him, her small body rising and falling with each shallow breath. Her fur was matted and dirty, and her once bright eyes were now closed, as if she were too tired to face the world. Alex gently ran his fingers through her fur, his touch light and careful, afraid that even the smallest movement might disturb her fragile peace. She let out a soft, contented purr, a sound that should have been comforting, but instead brought tears to Alex's eyes. He had almost lost her. The thought hit him like a punch to the gut, and his chest tightened as a wave of guilt and fear washed over him. He had failed to protect her, to keep her safe from the darkness that had crept into their lives. And though she was here now, alive and breathing, he couldn't shake the feeling that the danger wasn't over. Alex's gaze drifted to the window, the glass reflecting the dim light of the room. Beyond it, the yard stretched out into the night, the shadows deep and impenetrable. The moon hung low in the sky, its pale light casting an otherworldly glow over the neighborhood. He shivered as his eyes caught something carved into the wooden frame of the window, strange symbol, jagged and unfamiliar, as if someone had scratched it there with a knife. He had noticed similar markings on the fence earlier that week, but had dismissed them as graffiti. Now, they seemed to pulse faintly in the moonlight, filling him with a sense of unease he couldn't explain. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, their branches clawing at the air like skeletal fingers. His mind flashed back to the old journal he had found in the attic when he first moved in. The leather-bound book had been filled with cryptic entries, written in a shaky hand, warning of the watchers in the dark and the symbols that could keep them at bay. At the time, Alex had dismissed it as the ramblings of a paranoid mind, but now, staring at the jagged carvings on the window frame, he wasn't so sure. The journal had mentioned something else, too, something about offerings and pacts, though the details had been too fragmented to make sense of. Alex's stomach churned as he realized he might be living in the middle of a nightmare that had been unfolding long before he arrived. But it wasn't the trees or the moonlight that held Alex's attention. It was the shadows. They seemed to shift and writhe, moving in ways that defied logic, as if they were alive. He stared at them, his heart pounding in his chest, his mind racing with questions he couldn't answer. Was it just his imagination? Or was something out there, watching, waiting? The memory of Mr. Grayson's face flashed in his mind. Those cold, unrelenting eyes, that twisted smile, the way he had whispered, "You'll regret the day you ever cross me." Even now, with Mr. Grayson in police custody, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that his neighbor's influence lingered, like a stain that couldn't be washed away. He tightened his grip on the baseball bat that still rested in his lap, the wood cool and solid beneath his fingers. It was a small comfort, a reminder that he wasn't completely helpless. But deep down, Alex knew that a bat wouldn't be enough to protect him from whatever was out there. This wasn't just about Mr. Grayson. This was something older, darker, something that had been lurking in the shadows of this neighborhood long before Alex had moved here. Luna stirred beside him, her small body pressing against his leg. She let out a faint meow, her voice weak but insistent, as if she were trying to tell him something. Alex looked down at her, his heart aching at the sight of her frailty. He placed a protective hand on her back, his fingers brushing against the soft fur. "It's okay, Luna," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I've got you. I won't let anything happen to you." But even as he said the words, a part of him doubted their truth. How could he protect her from something he didn't understand, something he couldn't see? The shadows outside seemed to mock him, their movements slow and deliberate, as if they were alive. He stared at them, his heart pounding in his chest, his mind racing with questions he couldn't answer. Was it just his imagination, or was something out there, watching, waiting? His thoughts drifted to the old journal he had found in the attic. When he first moved, a journal filled with cryptic entries about the watchers in the dark and warnings to never leave the windows uncovered at night. At the time, he had dismissed it as the ramblings of a paranoid mind. Now, he wasn't so sure. A sudden creak broke the silence, the sound coming from somewhere deep within the house. Alex froze, his breath catching in his throat. His eyes darted toward the hallway, where the darkness seemed to stretch endlessly, swallowing the faint light from the living room. The creak came again, louder this time, followed by a faint, almost imperceptible whisper. Alex's grip on the bat tightened, his knuckles turning white. He rose slowly from the couch, his movements careful and deliberate, his eyes never leaving the hallway. Luna let out another soft meow, her ears twitching as if she, too, had heard the sound. "Stay here," Alex whispered, his voice trembling. He didn't know who he was talking to, Luna, himself, or the darkness that seemed to be closing in around him. He took a step toward the hallway, the floorboards creaking beneath his weight. The whispering grew louder, more distinct, though the words were still unintelligible. It was a low, guttural sound, like the voice of something ancient and malevolent. Alex's heart pounded in his chest, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The shadows in the hallway seemed to shift, coalescing into shapes that defied explanation. Alex blinked, his mind struggling to make sense of what he was seeing. For a moment, he thought he saw a figure standing at the end of the hallway, its form tall and thin, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. But when he blinked again, it was gone, leaving only the oppressive blackness behind. He backed away slowly, his hands trembling as he clutched the bat. The whispers faded, replaced by a heavy silence that was somehow even more unsettling. Alex returned to the couch, his legs weak, his body trembling. He sat down beside Luna, his hand resting protectively on her back. The window caught his attention again, and he turned to look outside. The shadows were still there, shifting and writhing, their movements slow and deliberate. Alex stared at them, his mind racing with questions and fears. Were they watching him? Were they waiting for him to let his guard down? Luna let out a soft purr, her small body pressing against his side. Alex looked down at her, his heart aching with a mix of love and fear. She was his anchor, his reason to keep fighting, to keep going. But she was also his greatest vulnerability, the thing that the darkness could use against him. He tightened his grip on the bat, his eyes scanning the room, the windows, the shadows. He didn't know what was coming, but he knew it wasn't over. The darkness was still out there, lurking, waiting for its chance to strike. And when it did, Alex would be ready. Alex staring out the window, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. The shadows outside seemed to pulse and shift, their movements slow and deliberate, as if they are alive. The faint sound of a meow echoes through the room, but this time, it doesn't come from Luna. It comes from somewhere outside, in the darkness. Alex's breath catches in his throat, his hand tightening on the bat. He looked down at Luna, who was still curled up on the couch, her small body rising and falling with each breath. But something about her seemed off. Her fur, once soft and warm, now felt cold to the touch, as if the life had been drained from her. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a brief moment, Alex thought he saw them glint with an unnatural, faintly glowing light. A chill ran down his spine as Luna let out a soft meow, her voice weak but strange, almost distorted. The sound echoed through the room, and Alex's gaze snapped back to the window. The shadows outside seemed to pulse and shift, their movement slow and deliberate, as if they were alive. Then, from somewhere deep in the darkness outside, another meow echoed back low, guttural, and wrong. Alex's breath caught in his throat, his hand tightening on the bat. The lights in the house flickered, and the air grew heavy, suffocating. Alex's vision blurred as the shadows outside seemed to seep through the walls, stretching toward him like dark skeletal hands. He turned to run, but his legs felt like lead, his body frozen in place. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the chaos stopped. The lights steadied, the shadows retreated, and the house fell silent once more. Alex stood there, trembling, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He turned back to the couch, but Luna was gone. The blanket where she had been lying was empty. The faint imprint of her body, the only sign she had ever been there. A single sound broke the silence, a soft, rhythmic tapping. Alex turned toward the window, his heart pounding in his chest. There, on the other side of the glass, was Luna. She was sitting in the yard, her fur matted and dirty, her eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. She stared at him, unblinking, as the shadows swirled around her like a living shroud. And then she meowed. The sound was wrong, distorted, layered, as if a dozen voices were speaking through her at once. Alex stumbled backward, his mind racing, his body trembling with fear. The shadows outside began to spread, creeping across the yard and up the walls of the house, their movement slow and deliberate. Alex's breath caught in his throat as he realized the truth. Luna wasn't his anymore. She belonged to them now.